Developed and published by Ad Hoc Studios, Dispatch is actually their debut title. It's a Telltale style superhero comedy game, which is funny since the developers of the game are actually former Telltale employees since its bankruptcy and closure in 2018. For their debut game, it sold above expectations, selling over 1 million units in just 10 days. And as I'm recording this, it sold over 4 million units. Dispatch initially released on PS5 and Steam on the 22nd of October 2025, then later released on both Switches on the 28th of January 2026, with the planned Xbox launch sometime in the summer of this year. Before I continue, please be advised that there will be spoilers ahead, so watch at your own risk. Without further ado, let's get into the lore behind Dispatch. This game's story is structured in episodes. So episode 1 begins and we're introduced to our main protagonist, Robert Robertson III, and he's seen talking to someone off screen about his dad. The off screen stranger isn't buying his answer though, and then we get our first choice of the game where I choose I love my dad. But then we learn his father passed away. They go back and forth when we again learn that Robert is going after Shroud, who ultimately caused the events of his father dying. We also learn Robert has someone tied up in relation to Shroud and continues to press him on his location where he straight up refuses to, so Robert, predicting how it would go, threatens to throw him off the balcony if he doesn't say anything. So he talks and then we get another choice, where I choose pull him back. Robert leaves him on the floor and this is where we find that he's the superhero Mecha Man when he prepares to head out. Mecha Man arrives at the steel mill where Shroud is and begins taking his goons out one by one until he finds a tablet on one of them, and to get inside the security system he has to solve a puzzle. Once solved, he gets inside and accesses the building's blueprint to find where he needs to go, but then when he believes he's found Shroud, another choice pops up where I choose it's over Shroud, and then we find out the mysterious man is actually the guy we just saved. While the goon continues yapping, I get another choice and choose punt. What happened next was probably the coolest thing I've ever seen. The goon of course comes back and we learn his name to be Toxic. Mecha Man and Toxic battle back and forth when Mecha Man eventually injures Toxic and shoots down a big steel piece of machinery on him. But the other goons surround him and he's covered by the blob guy when he's pulled up and electrocuted, which causes a malfunction in the robots, and while Robert attempts to get the robot back online, Shroud makes an appearance. Some good news is revealed. Shroud doesn't want to cause more bloodshed, he just wants the Astral pulse. But of course, Robert isn't just gonna give it up like that. But Toxic continues taunting Robert when we get a choice and I choose ignore him, where Robert manages to get the suit working again and gets out of there. However, during the flight home, it's discovered there was a bomb planted on the back of the robot, which ultimately destroys the robot and concusses Robert. After the events of the explosion, Robert went silent, which led everyone to believe he was deceased or in a coma. But after some time, he finally addressed the media and broke his silence. Because Robert was broke from funding his superhero career as Mecha Man and having to drain his savings to repair his suit, he unfortunately reached the end of the road where his suit was beyond the ability to repair, therefore announcing that he was stepping back from superhero work. As usual from reporters, they bombard him with questions and he addresses one of them, who decides to rage bait Robert, and I hit him back with kindness.
You're unimportant, which leads me to my next question. Most heroes avenge their family. You did the opposite. You killed their legacy. How disappointed would your dad be if he were here right now? Your father, your grandfather, they must be rolling over in their graves.
I think he'd be proud, because I'm alive. Which, as you so sensitively pointed out, he isn't.
Shortly after, a group of thieves show up next to Robert, stealing a bunch of TVs, where I choose I was watching that. Then when the orange ski mask guy walks up to him, I choose I'm Mecha Man. I choose to punch with Robert's right hand, but it does nothing. Instead, it leads to him getting jumped. But then, he is saved by fellow superhero Blonde Blazer. She mentions her occupation at the SDN or Superhero Dispatch Network when she gets him up and notices his dislocated arm. She attempts to put it back in place, where I choose have you done this before, when she pops it back in place. The pair head out to a bar, and after a bit of chit chat, Blazer begins sculling her drink, where I choose rough day, but it turns out because of her powers, she's a super heavyweight when it comes to that. They begin yapping again, and we learn Robert spent millions on his career to the point he's been doing DIY repairs such as duct tape to make ends meet for the suit. She asks him why he did that, and I choose, I like helping people. She then reveals her intentions and wants to learn more about Robert before offering a proposition before I choose sounds intriguing. While Robert responds, he has a drink without looking and ends up having alcohol instead of water. Blazer goes to clean up while Robert apologizes, but then he's harassed by someone named Flambe. They seem to know each other, but Robert has no recollection of such events. Robert thinks of a random name, and I choose Mr. Wet Ponytail, until Flambe shows his fire before Robert's memory comes back and remembers Flambe, where he tries to kick him out because he's not a hero anymore, until I choose to throw alcohol on him. The bartender then kicks him out before Blazer finds him, where she asks what happened, and I choose made a little mess. Blazer takes Robert on a little trip where they sit on a billboard facing the Hollywood sign that displays Phenomena Man, where I choose I really needed this. It's at this point Blazer blows her cover and says Robert's name. He responds confused because he never said his name, so he wants to know what's going on. She obliges but wants to know the origins behind his name first, so he tells her, but she isn't drunk enough to tell her origin story. She then scoots over, getting closer to him when she takes his mask off. I thought the moment was still early days, so I let the moment pass. Then it's revealed she was actually here on official business, which is how she knew Robert's name. Then she reveals another familiar superhero name, Trackstar. Robert immediately knows who it is and says he's basically family, but it turns out he works at SDN and recommended Robert for a job. So then she finally reveals the proposition.
In exchange for dispatching and mentoring some of our rookie heroes, SDN can make you Mecha Man again. But this time with all the resources that a company as big as ours has at their disposal.
I choose my suit was destroyed, but Blazer believes it can still be repaired even though it'll take some time with how badly damaged the suit is. Robert basically has no options left, and it'll be a good opportunity to distract himself, so I choose when do I start. Robert goes through training for dispatching and comes out to Blazer asleep on his shoulder when he wakes her up, and before she leaves, she tells him to meet at the SDN offices tomorrow. Robert returns home to his dog. Episode 2 begins with a commercial that shows a lady coming out of her house to go to band practice when she sees a rock on her car preventing her from leaving before Phenomena Man lifts the rock off her car acting like he's helping her. Robert thinks out loud when he receives a response from fellow superhero Waterboy. Waterboy begins gassing up Phenomena Man, but I choose not a great actor, where Robert shows his disagreement with Waterboy. Waterboy responds saying he's the best actor when it comes to danger, which Robert agrees on. Waterboy then attempts to tie his tie, but struggles when Robert helps him out, and he learns he's there for an interview, until someone else walks into the SDN offices. It's Flambe, and his eyebrows seem to be patchy due to the bar incident from last night. Robert hides behind Waterboy as he walks in, and he gets a bit close to Waterboy before he recognizes Robert as Mecha Man. Shortly after, Blazer walks in. She grabs Robert and they get inside the conference room. She gives Robert a SDN uniform and she stays in the room while he changes and asks if she should turn around. I choose I don't mind, but she ends up turning around anyway. Blazer begins apologizing for her actions last night, expressing deep regret, when I choose we were drunk. Robert throws his suit onto the chair next to him, but it lands weird like there's someone there. Next thing you know, someone invisible is standing up and runs out from panic, running into the door. And this is where we're introduced to Invisigal, the brand-friendly version of invisibility. Blazer introduces us at the same time we learn about the Phoenix program. The purpose behind said program is taking former supervillains and rehabilitating them, getting them to use their powers for good. Blazer introduces Invisigal to us and tells her to keep Robert's Mecha Man identity a secret, where I choose I'm here to help. Invisigal drools over Robert before leaving, and we find out there's a weekly ranking list for all the heroes in the company. Invisigal is at the bottom. Blazer shows Robert around the office, where I choose how many heroes work here, and it turns out there's quite a few, ranging from a network wide to the specific branch they're in itself. Robert heads into the bathroom when someone comes in next to him, and we learn it to be Royd. You know I had to give my guy a bro fizz, come on. Robert makes a joke about Royd being on roids because of his name, and after denying it at first, then thinking about it, he begins to question himself, but then I choose no, I'm just kidding. Before Robert leaves, Royd knows of Robert's identity, but he's on a need-to-know basis and is aware it's forbidden to say anything until we learn Royd is the one who's taking care of the repairs of Robert's suit. Robert heads over to the record room and is greeted by an old man. Robert is confused by this interaction and I choose "Do I know you?" when we learn the old man to be Trackstar. We also learn he goes by Chase in the office. The pair reminisce on the past when Chase says he tried reaching out once Robert's father passed, but there was no response. Robert was in a weird place when his father passed, which Chase understands, but then Robert asks why Chase looks so old. Turns out it's a side effect of his powers. He is the fastest man alive as a superhero, but he ages just as fast as well. I choose that's cruel, and Chase couldn't agree more. Before we continue, we're let in on a bit of the banter between the two.
You better not. I would resurrect and re-kill your fucking father in front of you if it meant being able to use my powers again.
Jesus, Chase.
Wow.
What? Obviously, I'd let Robert have one last I love you before I extinguish the light from his eyes.
Robert is introduced to the Phoenix program and the Z team. The team consists of Sonar, Flambe, Invisigal, Coupe, Punch-Up, Malevola, Golem, and Prism. However, when Robert introduces himself to the team, they immediately clown on him when Chase goes in on them. Towards the end of the first dispatching shift, Granny's gets broken into and Invisigal heads straight there to take care of things to get unbanned. Robert gets on cams and we see Granny on the ground unconscious. Invisigal asks his favorite donut and I choose plain glazed, when Robert plays along to Invisigal's teasing. Invisigal checks his pulse and he's still with us, so Robert hacks into the security system to check if the perp is still on the premises, and sure enough he is. But the perp ends up figuring out people know he's there and heads to the front where Invisigal is before she goes invisible, throwing a tray of donuts at him. She slowly approaches him with confidence until that quickly fades when the perp gets back up. Invisigal begins punching him to the point he flies over the counter when I tell Invisigal to go invisible before she slams his head into donuts, getting into a fight, but Lightning Struck has her pinned, so Robert hacks into the overhead sprinklers successfully and shorts his blaster. They continue back and forth until they're blasted from another direction. It's Granny. Invisigal attempts to convince him to stand down, but he refuses, so I choose Disarm the Thief. However, Invisigal disobeys the order and does her own thing. Lightning Struck gets away and the mission is a fail. Chase provides the perspective of them being supervillains and not soldiers in the army. The shift ends and Robert gets a snack from the vending machine, but is startled by Sonar, so he grabs another snack before he's again startled by Invisigal. She teases him for flinching when Robert says when you've lived your life in fear over the last 15 years, you'd be reacting the same. But then Invisigal fires back saying, what makes you think my life's been any different? Then I choose I can't just disappear, which she seems highly offended by. The conversation ends with Invisigal saying she came to celebrate the mission going well when I choose you ignored my order. Then they go back and forth until Sonar grinds up some coffee making noise, causing them to talk louder when I again choose you need me. Invisigal storms out but comes back in to punch Robert in the face. In the office, Blazer asks about the tissue up our nose when I choose Invisigal punched me. Blazer is not happy with Invisigal's decisions, but nonetheless they move on and discuss Robert's first shift where Blazer was impressed by Robert's performance dispatching. They address the Granny situation, but Blazer is optimistic about Invisigal and isn't giving up on her just yet. I choose she disobeyed a direct order, and it's from here we learn that that's what she's known for and it's why they're hopeful Robert can help her. But then Robert lays down the law and says as much as I enjoyed the banter at times, I'm here to do a job. If the Phoenix program is to survive, then we need a different approach and treat the Z team like what they are, supervillains. And if things get heated, you need to trust me to handle it so I earn their respect even if I don't have powers. Blazer gives it a chance and is on board with Robert's demands. Chase has little to no faith in the plan, but Blazer ain't having the negativity. Robert walks out to Waterboy at his desk, cleaning, and tries to explain the awkward situation when we see bits and pieces of a donut on Robert's computer. Waterboy begins to explain that Invisigal put a donut at his desk and walked away before coming back and smashing it to pieces, causing a huge mess. Waterboy offers to clean it, but Robert declines, until we learn that Waterboy actually got the job he was being interviewed for. Not as a hero, however, but as a janitor, and with Robert's help. Blazer walks out and she follows behind Robert as they walk out together when she tells him trying to fix the Z team has no impact on the company trying to fix the Mecha Man suits, which Robert is pleased to hear. Blazer tells Robert she's glad he's here when I choose I'm glad I'm here too. Blazer goes to tell Robert something on her mind, but as she does, they're interrupted by Phenomena Man. We quickly learn they're in a relationship before Blazer introduces them both, when we learn Blazer put in a good word about Robert. Blazer praises his first day performance, and to celebrate, Phenomena Man invites Robert to dinner with them. Blazer silently tells Robert to say no, and I choose the excuse of getting home to the dog. Episode 3 begins with Royd throwing the Mecha Man parts into the truck to get it transported. They head inside Robert's apartment when Royd feels the depression of the apartment and wonders if Robert feels it too. But I choose I've been focused on my work. Royd heads over to the box and rummages through it trying to find the Astral Pulse but fails. According to Robert, it's been lost with no sign of it anywhere since the incident. The Astral Pulse powers the whole suit, which Robert is aware of, but his dad didn't have schematics for it, so there isn't much that can be done. Royd responds optimistic that they'll figure it out. They arrive at the loading area of SDN when Royd begins explaining the science behind the Astral Pulse, when I choose sounds pretty important. They get to the lab and Royd tells a story of how he met Robert's dad one time. Royd was being naughty stealing stuff when he was caught, and they had an hour-long conversation about technology before he was put behind bars and sent to the Phoenix program. Robert gets vulnerable and says that's longer than any conversation he had with him. He uses the excuse of him spending his time building Astral Pulses for not having the time to talk to Robert. But Royd reveals there's two different types of people, gearheads and science nerds. One's in a garage, one's in a lab. Royd doesn't believe Robert's dad would be the one building the pulse, and when asked how he knows this from one conversation, he reveals that he's both and opens the lab. Royd shows what the fixed suit is going to look like, and Robert is in love. Robert heads into work with his dog when Gollum walks past and shoulders him. I chose to be the bigger person and let it go. He gets to his desk and asks Chase for a favor. Chase wonders what it could possibly be when he spots the dog and loses his train of thought. Robert says the dog is the favor, and Chase is more than happy to look after him. Then Blazer comes over and sees the dog before the moment is ruined by Robert trying to make the dog have a voice. Blazer pulls Robert aside and learns her and Phenomena Man broke up. I choose I'm sorry Blazer before they get into why she actually pulled Robert aside. Blazer plans to have Robert cut someone from the Z team, where I choose are you sure about that? But then Blazer explains that if they cut someone from the bottom of the leaderboard, it'll show they mean business. Robert and Chase talk at the leaderboards when Chase says a team member needs some assistance. Robert gets to his desk and the team member is revealed to be Sonar. He requests a locksmith because Coupe handcuffed him to a squat rack. Robert lays down the law and tells the team to do their job despite a cut happening, since they'll be judged on performance. The team members respond unpleasantly, with a few voicing their frustrations. After an inspirational speech, Sonar follows up on his request and Robert asks for someone to help Sonar. During the shift, a whole bunch of sabotage takes place, and the icing on the cake is the final job where Malevola volunteers to go, but Invisigal follows behind. She sets a trap for Malevola and trips her when she runs by, allowing the villain to escape. Again, Malevola and Invisigal battle until Robert gets cut and calls a team meeting. When he gets in, the team are talking to each other and not paying attention to Robert, but when Robert tries to get their attention, Golem walks in disrespectfully, launching Robert into some chairs. I choose to kick Golem out and the meeting officially starts. It starts off rough with Prism running her mouth to Robert and nearly ending Punch-Up's life, then Coupe threatening her because she took one of her knives, until Robert gives a motivating and inspiring speech telling the team he sees potential. Robert then continues on explaining the meaning behind the Phoenix, since it's the name of the program, saying it was so tired of its immortality that it tricked the sun god into burning its nest trying to kill the bird, but instead it rose from the ashes reborn, and says the Z team are all phoenixes. The second shift begins and team performance is a lot better. After the shift, an alert pops up with Invisigal outside the coverage area, and it shows her at a park on a swing set smoking a cancer stick. She pretty much accepts defeat and asks to be cut, but Robert won't let her off that easy. She uses the excuse that she wasn't meant to be a hero and is fated to be a villain with her powers, but I choose you make your own destiny. destiny. After more inspiring words from Robert, an alert pops up with a burglary happening, and the villain is the guy Invisigal keeps letting get away. Invisigal refuses, but I choose that this could make the difference. However, she doesn't believe he's capable of big time heists until Robert reveals he's about to rob $250,000 worth of jewelry. She arrives at the crime scene, taking out the men one by one, putting the main guy on edge to the point he destroys the cameras, removing Robert's eyes on the scene. He hacks back in but can't see anything. After hacking into the next camera, he's spotted and helps out Invisigal. Robert discovers an electrical system he can access that has the master lights and comes up with an idea. However, I failed the hack and Invisigal fights him anyway and ultimately ends up victorious. Invisigal brings Thunderstruck to SDN and is praised by the co-workers for a job well done. However, Robert is confused by it all when Blazer shows him the different channels on the headset, revealing Robert and Invisigal's whole conversation was broadcast to the entire SDN branch. Blazer asks Robert if he meant what he said about Invisigal having a shot. When I choose everyone has a shot. The leaderboard shows Invisigal still at the bottom of the leaderboard, and in Blazer's office we're presented with two options, Sonar and Coupe. Turns out Invisigal's actions took it out of last place, but the leaderboard is delayed. Then came the choice, where I chose to cut Coupe. Robert gets Coupe in for a one-on-one and breaks the news to her. She reveals she cheered for Invisigal because she thought she was being cut. In response to her being cut, Coupe leaves a souvenir. Episode 4 begins with a spicy scene involving Invisigal and Robert. But it was just a dream. Robert wakes up, starting his day and heading off to work, until he gets to his desk. Turns out it was an office prank by Punch Up, who wasn't too happy about Coupe being cut. Chase warned Robert about it escalating. When I choose maybe it was a mistake, thinking it was about the office prank. Chase continues on until he ends his sentence with looking up at Invisigal. She's staring at Robert, which freaks him out. Chase lets Robert know that Blazer is looking at filling the open spot on the team with either Phenomena Man or Waterboy. Robert considers his options, but nothing about them speaks to him. A news item then plays on the TV, showing Phenomena Man walking on the highway, disrupting traffic, showing his depression from the breakup. However, the viewing is quickly cut short with Waterboy trying to clean the TV. Back at the lab, Robert does another test with the prototype Astral pulse to get the suit working again. I choose to shadowbox, but sadly the test is a fail. Robert goes through schematics before Invisigal shows up and gives Robert an up-down. She then asks a very important question. I then chose to tell the truth because after all, it was a very important question. Robert and Invisigal then silently stare at each other, which freaks Royd out. But we find out Invisigal was really there because Blazer sent her to get Robert. Robert heads to Blazer, who was putting on a dress, and the timing of it all has Blazer asking for help to be zipped up. Robert obliges, and when she turns around, her nipple is showing, but I choose looks good, which in response she didn't seem to appreciate. She asks again how she looks, but I choose incredible. Blazer reveals she was meant to go to the event with Phenomena Man, but that's probably not going to happen. Turns out he was indefinitely suspended from the SDN branch he was working for. Blazer wants Robert to talk to him to try and provide some perspective, especially since he's been considered to join the Z team. She also wants Robert to tell him to stop sending her edible arrangements since there's no variety with what he's sending anyway. Robert talks to Phenomena Man and listens to him talking about how he's feeling. When I choose, I've had those days, which Phenomena Man appreciates Robert for sharing his relatable experience. Phenomena Man then sits up, but at the velocity he sits up, shards of glass shoot up over to Robert. He wonders if there's someone else in the picture for Blazer, which could be the cause of all this. When I choose, I don't think so. Robert gives it to him straight and says Blazer is her own person making her own decisions and she's decided she doesn't want to be with you, which Phenomena Man seems to accept. Then Robert ends the conversation telling him to stop with the edible arrangements until Phenomena Man points out the shards of glass in his chest from when he sat up. Phenomena Man attempts to fly away, but the depression takes over him. Robert extracts the shards of glass from his chest in the bathroom when Invisigal appears. She finally tells me about the dream she had about the spicy scene involving them, where I choose, how was I? Invisigal yaps some more until she mentions the situation with Blazer's dress. They share a moment until it's ruined him by Waterboy, and Invisigal is not happy about it. The first shift of the day begins, which goes okay, leading into a lunch break. Waterboy takes out a bunch of takeaway boxes from the fridge, throwing them out, until Flambe walks in, and it seems one of the boxes Waterboy threw out was Flambe's, who isn't too happy about such a thing. Waterboy acknowledges his inability to read while getting the boxes out, but Flambe doesn't want them anymore, bumping the noodles in Waterboy's face. Robert notices and isn't happy about the disrespect. He presses Flambe when he continues to disrespect Waterboy. Then Robert goes down the report route, which doesn't make the situation any better. Flambe then walks out when I choose to throw a protein shake at him. Flambe is fired up when Blazer walks in and gets him to clean up. Blazer nearly slips when she asks Robert who's it going to be between Phenomenon Man or Waterboy. I chose Waterboy because I saw potential in him. Blazer tells Robert Waterboy looks up to Robert, or rather Mecha Man, but he won't say anything to anyone about Robert's actual identity. In the locker room, Robert sees Waterboy and is thankful to Robert for being picked for the team. The second and last shift begins when the team is introduced to Waterboy and they're not too happy about it. He has a rough start with his power being water and the nerves getting to him. The shift ends and I think the team is slowly warming up to him. Robert opens a drawer and picks up a photo which seems to be of him and his father before he has a moment and swings around in circles on the chair, staring at the ceiling before his dog Beef signals that he wants to play fetch. They play, but Beef doesn't even bother going for the ball, so they head back inside when Beef sniffs out something in the other room. And in this room is Waterboy sitting inside a water bucket, moping in his sadness with how the team treated him today. However, Robert tells him he doesn't believe he's got a stutter. Waterboy is in disbelief with such a statement, where I choose believe in yourself. Robert heads back to his desk to pack up when he gets an alert about Invisigal being outside of the coverage area when he sees she's at the movies and checks in on her. Robert and Invisigal go back and forth until Robert receives a message from Blazer asking him to dinner. I chose dinner with Blazer. Robert heads out to Blazer, and before anything happens, Blazer wants to show him something. Once she takes the amulet off, her hair changes from blonde to brunette. I choose to kiss her and to have a steamy makeout sesh, until she introduces herself as Mandy. They have dinner when they spot Waterboy still doing his older janitorial role. Mandy tries to get him to go home, but he can't hear anything and ends up putting up the finger, so they eventually give up. Episode 5 begins with Robert in the gym, training, where he has a flashback to Mecha Man heading back inside a burning building, dealing with the supervillain. Robert starts benching, and when Mecha Man is down and out, he struggles to continue benching when Flambe walks in. He teases Robert for trying to bench without a spotter and points to the poster on the wall. He continues on saying normies need spotters so they don't get hurt. When I choose heroes get hurt, until Flambe claps back saying not the good ones. Flambe continues teasing him about injuries when Robert teases him about the injury he sustained to his eyebrows from Mecha Man, not knowing Robert is Mecha Man. Flambe fires back saying I got into a fight with an actual hero and he's definitely regretting tangoing with me. Robert responds saying he's probably regretting a lot of his decisions. Flambe responds again saying it's time to accept that you just don't got it anymore. Robert gets dressed at his locker before Blazer shows up and checks in on him, also wondering if he wants to go on an actual date since she had fun last night. Robert is down but asks if it'll be with Blazer or Mandy when she hits him with the, well, what do you prefer? He claims it's not a trap, but let's be real. I choose Mandy, however, and I can't tell if she's slightly offended or actually okay with it. Robert heads to his desk and sees a box of donuts on it from Waterboy, so they're basically inedible now. The first shift of the day begins and it went surprisingly well. In the break room, Robert is making lunch when Malevola and Prism try to dissect Robert to figure out what hero he was. Eventually, Prism just asks Robert when we find out about a bet going around the team for who Robert used to be, and they beg for a hint. When I choose, I was blue, but it gives them little to nothing to work with. Malevola throws a coffee cup at him to test the reflexes and he passes, before his dog licks up the coffee and Robert scoops him up. Back at the lab, Robert is working on his suit while he talks to Chase about the Red Ring and Shroud when Chase asks if Robert would eliminate Shroud. I choose yes. The second shift of the day begins and it goes pretty well. The crew plan to go out for drinks and end up settling on the Sardine, which is a villain bar. Robert signs off for the weekend but is peer pressured into drinks and ends up tagging along. Golem is sitting outside because he's too big to be inside before he's stopped by the guard at the door. Invisigal handles it and he heads inside, finding Invisigal at the bar where she gets him to buy her a drink until the rest of the team join up at the bar. Now he's buying buying the whole team drinks, which Punch Up appreciates when I choose you're buying next. Robert grabs the drinks and is stopped by a supervillain who gives him a dirty look before he gives a drink to Waterboy, Flambe who's worried about looking like an idiot singing Whitney Houston, Sona who's playing pool, Golem and the bouncer outside before finding an open spot at Invisigal's table and takes a seat. He's convinced everyone thinks he's a narc when Invisigal tells him they can smell the hero on you, you're the enemy. Robert responds saying, but I bought them drinks, what more do they want? Invisigal responds saying, you can do all that and everything else, but the thought of you potentially ruining their life isn't going to go away. Invisigal then gives advice and says to come clean about who you are. What are the odds someone in here's been busted by you anyway? Robert gives her a look that answers her question. Then we go back to the Mecha Man flashback and we learn the man he was fighting the whole time was Flambe. I choose I'm not done with you yet when Mecha Man launches an energy blade and slices his fingers off. We go back to present day with Flambe's cut fingers and him singing making fun of Robert. Then Robert tells Invisigal about the incident involving Flambe at the start of the game. They go back and forth until a supervillain named Armstrong comes over and talks shit to Robert. Robert can't see him and wonders if he's a big dude. Invisigal responds kind of confirming his question when Armstrong comes back around talking some more shit when I choose let me buy you a drink and get immediately slapped in the face. He grabs Invisigal before he's whacked in the back of the head with a pool cue. Robert is staring at the stars while laying down on concrete before Malevola brings him a drink, and the team look like they've just had a massive workout. Waterboy brings out the food and the team indulge when Robert puts his straw in his drink and we see a bar fight going on. Invisigal throws Robert a hot sauce packet and we learn from Golem that Robert took some friendly fire. When Robert opens the hot sauce packet, we're back at the bar fight where Punch Up is in flow state and ends up punching Robert in the no-no square. Prism asks him if he's washed his hands after punching everyone's no-no squares.
Party seems salty.
Robert finally gets his taco order and when he takes a bite, we're back at the bar fight again where he bites the supervillain's thumb off before he's dragged into the bathroom and makes the supervillain laser himself. The team clean up the rest of the bar and end the fights by breaking Strong Arm's actual arms. The team have a moment where they wonder who Robert really is since the beef with the Red Ring. I choose I'm Mecha Man and Flambe is not happy about it. But when he goes to incinerate Robert, Golem saves him. Then Waterboy extinguishes his fire and the team laugh at him before he gets cut and flies away. The team then introduce themselves. Episode 6 begins with another Mecha Man test at the lab, but he has the team as an audience this time due to the bet. Chase expresses his shock for Robert actually hanging out with them and goes back and forth with the Invisigal when I choose you miss 3 AM tacos. And then I choose salute when Punch Up and Malevola pay Prism for losing the bet on Mecha Man having superpowers before they run their mouths. Invisigal calls the smoke overkill, which Robert agrees on, but Royd is confused on what smoke they're talking about. All of a sudden it goes red and the alert inside the suit goes off. They try to get in, but there's objects blocking the door until Malevola uses her powers to allow them to travel through the door and get to Robert. The suit unfortunately self-destructs and Robert is put in hospital. He wakes up to see Royd in what seems to be a worse condition than Robert and Chase. Robert checks in on Royd when he expresses sadness and defeat for not being able to recreate the Astral pulse. He calls himself a failure when I choose I believe in you. Chase then delivers an insane line.
I heard that big bastard crying in the bathroom. Makes it hard to shit when somebody's doing that next to you, you know?
Pretty distracting, yeah.
Robert asks Chase how everyone's doing, including Invisigal, and reluctantly says she's fine, but happily says she's good at disappearing when people get hurt. Robert questions Chase on why he's so hard on Invisigal compared to everyone else, when Chase says she's a liability. He continues on saying someone needs to be objective when it's clear something's going on between the two of you. What I choose is strictly professional, and Chase tells Robert to be careful. Robert gets off the hospital bed and soldiers on back to work. When he gets back to his desk, Blaze is there doing the dispatching for him. She notices him and gives him a hug. A bit of a longer one than normal when she says his hospital trip gave them a bit of a scare. Robert says I'm fine. Just time traveled several hours into the future where I feel pretty rested. He checks in on how the shift's going and she says it's good but also challenging and gives Robert his flowers for a stellar dispatching. She apologizes for the Astral Pulse failure and requests to give them some time while they find alternatives. She ends the conversation by saying she's looking forward to tonight. Robert agrees but is also confused on what she means. Robert continues continues on with the rest of the shift, and it goes pretty well. Robert heads back to the lab to assess the damage before we see him at his apartment on the floor, drinking and talking to his dog, where I choose Z Team's more important. Shortly after, Beef notices people at the door when Malevola and Invisigal enter the apartment. I choose I'm in my underwear, and we find out soon after Invisigal planned a housewarming party at Robert's without its consent. Then it's discovered the party is also a cover for a plan to retrieve the original Astral Pulse. It seems like the Astral Pulse was never destroyed. It just got passed around to different evil people who couldn't handle its power and passed it on to the next highest bidder. I choose you're sure this will work, but they don't know either. The last known location of the pulse was from a boat in Marina del Rey, which is Yachty territory, whom Malevola has some history with. The party begins, and in the middle of it, Robert dances with Blazer. Invisigal circles a warehouse by the docks, but it's crawling with security. Invisigal offers to go, but Blazer shuts it down immediately. Invisigal says with the amount of firepower they have within the team, they'll be fine. But Chase also chimes in, which Invisigal doesn't appreciate, until Blazer de-escalates the situation and says to leave it to tomorrow night. Invisigal is shocked by what Blazer says when I choose make a plan first. Invisigal stands on business and says there's no guarantee it'll be there tomorrow, we need to go now. However, Chase does not like her attitude when she calls him old again and says heroes are talking, which triggers Chase and causes him to lose it at her. I choose back off Chase, but Chase continues on defending Robert and blasting Invisigal. He blasts her so much to the point she goes invisible and punches Chase in the face before she leaves the apartment. I choose you okay Chase when Blazer ends the party and gives Robert a kiss before she lets everyone know they will answer to her if anything about tonight is mentioned to anyone. Flambe arrives fashionably late and punches Robert in the face to release his anger. Robert heads outside to chuck his trash out when he spots Chase sitting alone when I choose that's a red zone. And it turns out Chase came back to apologize but got lost on the way back and ended up in someone else's apartment, which the guy didn't appreciate. They head inside Robert's apartment and chill on the balcony where they reminisce and reflect on the past, catching up after not seeing each other for many years. Robert walks by the computer and hears an alert. When he tends to it, we find out it's Invisigal still going for the Astral Pulse, but the place is crawling with supervillains. Robert attempts to get her to leave, but she stands on business on the fact that this may be their only chance of getting the pulse. So Robert adapts to the situation and hacks into the system to see if he can find anything on the pulse. He successfully does, and he notices a huge reading coming from the captain's quarters. She makes a run for it, but the door is locked. So Robert hacks it to open it, and she continues on when she comes across a flying supervillain while Robert hacks the speaker tower to help her out. Invisigal makes a run for it through the ship, fighting through the supervillains when Robert hacks the crane, which swings Invisigal to the captain's quarters. However, she's stopped by the lava villains who she gets away from and gets inside the captain's quarters. Robert hacks the safe and Invisigal retrieves the Astral Pulse. As she leaves, she notices the lava villains from earlier stop trying to get in, and when she gets out, she finds out they're deceased. But then the power goes out. Robert hacks into the camera and tells her to be careful with the steps. All seems good until we see Shroud is on the stairs as well. He grabs Invisigal and throws her to the floor along with the smoke grenade, knowing about Invisigal's asthma. Robert gives Invisigal some words of encouragement so she doesn't let Shroud win. Robert looks over and sees Chase about to take off before he leaves and saves Invisigal, bringing her to safety, but he unfortunately collapses from the side effect of his powers. Episode 7 begins with a young boy crying who's in the presence of a teen boy. The year is 2003 and this young boy is Robert and the teen boy is Chase. Chase heads out to the store and asks Robert if he wants anything since his father paid him. And Robert is shocked to learn he gets paid for looking after him. But nonetheless, I choose Twinkies. We're now in the hospital with Chase after saving Invisigal when I choose he was like a brother. Robert continues talking about his childhood memories with Chase before she reveals the news of Invisigal being suspended and suggests to Robert that she be cut from the team. I choose I'll get back to you, and Robert puts his hands in his face before Blazer gives him some cash for the vending machine and telling him Chase is proud of the man he's become. When Blazer leaves, Robert lets it out like a real man. In the break room, Robert puts the cash in the vending machine, but it won't accept it. Waterboy comes in and his demeanor changes. He's no longer the non-confident, doesn't know what to say kind of guy that we know him for. He's mad about the Invisigal situation and we see a different side of him that I really like. Waterboy asks Robert if Chase did the right thing. When I choose, I honestly don't know. Robert inserts the cash again after it was in the microwave when I finally takes it, but now it won't give him the food. Before Waterboy comes in and helps Robert out. Before the first shift begins, he updates the team on what's happening in regards to Invisigal getting suspended and Chase being in the hospital. The shift begins and it's a pretty depressing vibe, but was still a good one all things considering. Robert prepares to head home when Golem boots punch up through the conference room door and wonders what the bloody hell's going on. The team then tell him they want Invisigal cut. Golem is the only one who wants her to stay. So then comes the choice, where I choose cut her. Invisigal leaves the room and Robert meets her in the locker room. When I choose, they decided not me. Robert continues on saying, I think I tried the most with you, but it wasn't enough. He then takes responsibility for not doing enough for Invisigal. Invisigal responds feeding into the negativity of her not deserving anything from anyone and thinks what she's done to Robert can't ever be repaid. Then she tells him the truth about the night Robert was face to face with Shroud in the first episode. She was there. She always ran solo, but she had asthma problems and so she got an offer to work for them and she gets an augment that increases her lung capacity, but she'd be paid down for years. However, Shroud proposed to her that if she places a bomb on the back of Mecha Man undetected, then the whole debt would be cleared. And of course, she took it and it led to what happened. She felt instant remorse after she placed it though and quit on the spot, getting out of the building before the explosion even happened, which of course caused her augments to stop working and what led her to signing up for the Phoenix program. I choose I forgive you, and she reveals all she wanted was for people to look at her the same way Robert looks at Blazer, but instead got the complete opposite. Robert heads to the hospital inside the building and places beef on Chase's hospital bed while Robert gets a ride home. Before Blazer messages him saying the press have a story that an SDN hero got her and are asking for a statement. Blazer wants to tell them it was a track star but doesn't know how he'd feel about it. But then she offers another solution, mention Invisigal. The Z team are for this option and they'll say she went rogue and has been cut because of it. I choose Invisigal and say Chase can reveal his identity if he wants to when he wakes up, in which Blazer is on board with. Robert has some drinks at the Sardine Supervillain bar when Beard Guy and the bartender exchange conversation before Robert breaks his glass with his hands, causing a bit of blood. The bartender notices and calls Robert impatient. When I choose, could you shut the fuck up? The bartender presses Robert and they have a little face off until Beard Guy intervenes and diagnoses why Robert is the way he is right now, before getting Robert a drink on Beard Guy, but the bartender decides to give him one on him instead. The news item plays of Blazer running the statement of Invisigal parting ways with the team and the whole Phoenix program. Then, the bartender cheers the boys before making some interesting comments regarding Blazer. He doubles down on his comments and continues on until Robert has enough and I choose to let it go. The bartender talks to Beard Guy and even Beard Guy is shocked Robert let that go, which leaves the bartender confused until Beard Guy puts a bullet in the bartender's head. Beard Guy goes on about how he respects Blazer before he turns his head and we see an astral pulse in the side of his head, which leaves Robert speechless since he's face to face with Shroud once again. Then he calls Coupe over to knock Robert out. Shroud gives an inspirational speech before Coupe wakes Robert up through interrogation. Shroud threatens Robert with his father's gun with one bullet in the chamber and a 16.5% chance the last bullet hits him. Then he questions Robert on the astral pulse's location, where I choose to spit in his face. Shroud pulls the trigger, but the bullet wasn't in the chamber. He spins the chamber again before Robert says, if I did have it, why would I let you string me up like a piñata? Finishing up saying Invisigal didn't steal it, until Shroud shows security camera footage of Invisigal taking the astral pulse for herself. Shortly after, the front door blows up with Blazer showing up. Shroud offers her a drink, but she declines. She says she's here for Robert and deploys an intimidation tactic, saying the building is about to be surrounded by SDN agents, heroes, and everyone else the Red Ring have pissed off. She goes to finish her sentence, but is rudely cut off by Coupe. Shroud is offended by such actions and gives her the look. Coupe backs up and Shroud apologizes and realizes why they were cut. Blazer continues on acknowledging she's outnumbered and she wouldn't last long in combat, but but she's gonna damn well try to bring as many of them down with her as she can. Blazer gives them a choice to leave now or perish here. Shroud gives Blazer her flowers in response and orders his team to leave out of respect. Before Shroud leaves, he comes clean about the percentage, that it was actually 32%, but half sounds better. Blazer tends to Robert when I choose thanks for saving me. At the billboard, Blazer is confused by Invisigal's actions to keep the Astral pulse when I choose she's planning something. Robert sits in pain and says he just needs to sit there for like a few weeks and then he'll be right as rain. Blazer is shocked Robert is still conscious when he responds saying, when the pain's constant, you start to get used to it. They go back and forth about the Hollywood sign until an explosion happens. The Red Ring seem to have begun their destruction on LA and Robert is ready to deal with it. Episode 8 opens to the mascot making some coffee for the crew with a hint of tequila and brings one out to Galen, giving the last one to Robert, who was grateful for it before giving it a taste and giving the mascot a weird look. The office seems to have their hands tied up with heroes on multiple jobs when a call comes in from the refinery of multiple augmented villains breaking containments, and Blazer tells Galen to dispatch all available heroes in the area, but there are no heroes in the area. This causes Blazer to ask Robert if he can handle things at the office, where I choose go, and she gives Galen the tablet. Robert looks at Chase's station unoccupied before Royd comes in offering some help. Robert boots up the computer and sees only 3 team members active, which the team aren't too keen on his reaction to. In the end, Robert says we may be short-handed, but the rest of the team should trickle in as time goes on, so we'll have to make do for now. The shift begins, and as it goes on, a team member's tracker starts freaking out. So I locate it and it turns out to be Flambe's tracker. The leveler makes an appearance shortly after, using the excuse of her phone being on Do Not Disturb. The team attempts to rescue Flambe and are sadly unsuccessful, leading Flambe to be injured on his return. Shortly after, both Sonar's and Waterboy's trackers start freaking out, but we can only pick one. So I choose Sonar first, successfully locating his tracker. The team attempts to rescue Sonar from the yacht club and are successful. Flambe attempts to rescue Waterboy from a speeding train about to crash and is successful in his attempt. With everyone rescued, the city receives an overwhelming influx of calls, which causes Robert to look for additional help when he spots Phenomena Man. It's revealed he signed up for the monthly Melon subscription and has 11 months remaining. He spent $822. But he's down to help out the city, so Robert asks Galen to help put Phenomena Man into the hero pool. Robert adds him into the roster, and after completing a few calls, another influx of calls come in and the map zooms out, which means more ground to cover, but also the Red Ring makes a grand entrance, with Coupe leading the charge. But after doing some damage to Coupe and failing some calls, it was clear that nothing was working since the team was stretched thin from the attacks of the Red Ring. So Robert proposes to the team to not return to base after a call and stay out as long as they can, to be less predictable. Robert continues, but it begins when Flambe cuts him off. After a few more failed calls, Blazer joins the team. After a long, intense fight, Coupe is finally taken down and LA is saved. But the power goes out. The security team begins an evacuation protocol when Robert's dog Beef runs towards the hospital when Robert realizes. Robert arrives at Chase's room, but the doors are shut from the power outage, so he forces his way in. When he gets in, he looks at Chase, then the monitor showing his heart rate stable and has a sigh of relief. Beef is itching to get up on the bed though, but when Robert picks him up to put him on the bed, he hears a bang. Robert investigates the bang noise and heads inside the lab where Royd seems to be in a scuffle with someone. This someone turns out to be Invisigal. Royd and Invisigal go back and forth when I choose what is going on, and it turns out Invisigal is allegedly trying to help us, but Royd isn't buying it and ties her up. It also turns out Invisigal brought the pulse with her. She then says they need her and they don't know what's coming. Robert questions her when they look at the CCTV and notice a van pull up outside the building. And coming out of the van are a few guards and none other than Coupe herself. She destroys the camera and the building is officially under attack. I choose we need the Z team, but the Red Ring have jammers up, so no calls are going in or out. Robert is suspicious on how Invisigal knows this information and reveals they tried to recruit her again, but she said no, which Royd isn't buying. Royd quietly tells Robert that he moved the Mecha Man suit to the rec room and gives him a taser to defend himself with. Before he leaves though, he tells Robert to not listen to Invisigal and keep her tied up. But after he leaves, Robert talks to Invisigal, where I choose, why didn't you tell me? And she says she was afraid Shroud would come after Robert, so she kept the pulse safe for the time being to protect Robert. But then the conversation is interrupted when one of the villains on CCTV seems to be coming their way, and Invisigal warns Robert that while they're idiots, they're dangerous and you need my help. So I choose untie her, and Robert looks around the lab for something to cuddle with when the villain seems to be joined by the others. The elevator arrives and Robert gets set up defending with the taser in hand. He slightly peeks out and sees the villain in the elevator but not the other two. Robert prepares for an attack, but the villain runs straight past him. It turns out he really needed to use the bathroom, but the doors are locked behind a keycard that doesn't work without power. Robert looks over at the elevator and it's not closing properly because of the gun causing obstruction. Thumbstick eventually says screw it and decides to empty the tank in the pot plant. Robert takes his opportunity while he's distracted to sneak up behind him and taser him, but once he gets close enough, Invisigal decides to shoot him, and he falls back to the floor unconscious, which causes the urine to form a huge puddle. Invisigal asks Robert to put his no-no square away, where I choose yeah, alright. They head back to the lab and see Royd in combat, where Invisigal tells him to get his suit. After knocking out a bad guy, he locates the Mecha Man suit and replaces the Proto Pulse with the real Astral Pulse. Royd continues battling the Red Ring until he's outnumbered, but then Mecha Man comes in to save the day. However, more Red Ring goons come in, followed up by Toxic, who was convinced the fight is over from there, and Robert is just going to hand over the Astral Pulse. He continues taunting Robert until Armstrong comes in, demanding our arms get broken, before Toxic also demands the Pulse in exchange for Robert's life. But I choose, where's Shroud? And then in classic Hollywood fashion, Shroud shows up in an epic spider-like robot suit. And it's revealed that Shroud and Robert's dad has struck a deal where he would help Shroud build the mech if Shroud helped build the Astral Pulse. Learning this information, Robert responds saying that that's what this is all about, you needed to power your spider suits, but it turns out the reason for needing the pulse goes more deeper and political than that. He wants to change the world. I choose, can we skip this part, where they go in unison. Shroud gets ready to attack when I choose twin energy blades. After a badass fight sequence, I choose cluster bombs. Then Blazer comes in before she's caught by Shroud until she disappears from his hold. Half the crew battle the Red Ring goons while the other half battles Shroud. Mecha Man gets thrown towards the other half of the crew when Toxic walks in and wants a rematch, but Mecha Man sends someone else to deal with him. Phenomena Man attempts to deal with Shroud, but is instead blasted into the next universe. Blazer recognizes this, but before anything can be done, some familiar knives are thrown out the back of his suit, which then take control of him, where he's face to face with none other than Coupe, where she expresses how offended she is I chose to cut her instead of Sonar, and I choose, looks like I was right. They battle it out when Blazer comes in and tries to talk her into helping them rather than helping Shroud, but she has no interest. Then Blazer and Coupe battle it out when Coupe tries to get inside the suit, where Robert opens up and kicks her, which gives him the chance to fire out her wings so her knives no longer have any power, and neither does she. While Coupe falls down to the gym, Mecha Man is picked up by Shroud and they battle it out, while other members of the Z team battle more of the goons and successfully take them out. Back to Mecha Man as they prepare to fight. Blazer sees what's happening and believes she can get Shroud off guard when Mecha Man notices and tries to warn her away, but it's too late. Mecha Man gets angry and runs it straight at Shroud, battling him when the other members try to help as well, but it's no use. But then Shroud is finally taken out. We see Chase in the air and Blazer as Mandy, which was a move Shroud didn't see coming because he didn't know about the amulet. However, Shroud isn't completely done, but with the Astral Pulse missing, he can't do a lot. The Z team hit him with everything they've got when Invisigal plants a bomb on Shroud, and for the final part of the fight, I choose Super Spirit Bomb, where Shroud's suit is finally done for. The crew celebrate until Shroud makes an appearance with a very interesting hostage. He puts everyone on edge by threatening to drop him, but he won't. If he does, he'll be caught anyway, and if he did, he'd make sure he's deceased. I choose please don't do this when Shroud requests Robert to fly up onto the roof and gives Shroud the Astral Pulse. So he does, and as he gets out, he notices he still has the Proto Pulse and jumps out with both. Shroud calls Robert predictable and comes clean on how he knew beef was his weakness, that he'd have feelings for Blazer, that he'd take Invisigal under his wing, which is why she was planted there, and she still works for Shroud. All of what he said was to prove a point that he has everything planned out. And with the pulse, he won't have to predict, he'll just know. It comes to the exchange and Shroud warns Robert not to give the prototype pulse, that is a man of his word. Give the pulse and Robert gets his dog back. However, I choose to give him the Astral pulse. Shroud replaces the pulse and harnesses his newfound energy. All of a sudden, he pulls a gun on Robert and says if he lets him live, his odds of survival decrease exponentially. But then, Invisigal appears right next to Shroud and puts a knife through his throat. Invisigal gives him the pulse back and the aftermath of the conflict begins. Chase and the team talk to the news crew when Royd and Robert talk, where I choose couldn't do it without ya. Robert heads over to Mandy when the team tried to get Coupe released from the cuffs, which leaves it up to Robert, where I choose to forgive. Robert and Mandy share a drink together when they see Chase flying through the sky, and it seems like he's borrowing the amulet until they can figure out a different solution that doesn't cause him to age like no tomorrow. Mandy asks what Invisigal's gonna do now, and I choose take over the red ring, but Mandy doesn't see that lasting. And then they kiss. The game ends with the mascot taking a team photo. With the main story out of the way, it's time to get into some things regarding the story and theorize why the things that happened. So the first and only mention of this is in a news item after the Mecha Man suit explodes and crashes. The Brave Brigades are a group of superheroes who were operating in the city of Torrance for 15 years. Its members included Robert Robertson II, Vitalia, Trackstar, and Shroud. The group had a good run until one of the members, Shroud, turned rogue and betrayed them, as well as eliminating Robert. And of course, we know this reasoning to be because Robert didn't follow through on his promise he made with Shroud, that Shroud would help build the Astral pulse for the Mecha Man suit if Shroud was allowed back in the Brave Brigades. But Robert cancelled his vote to allow him back in, which led to the events that we know of. And then, as we know from the story, Trackstar had to step down because his powers made him age rapidly, so he had no choice. It remains unknown if the group is disbanded or still somewhat active. There isn't a lot on her, but from the little information we do have on her, her role on the team was the healer. She joined the team as one of the most trusted members, and it was actually Shroud who put in a good word for her to be part of the team. So Shroud's power is that he's Albert Einstein level intelligent. He creates augments for others that help strengthen their weakness. He also created one for himself that enhanced his intelligence levels to the max, able to predict anything and everything. But as the calculations of these predictions got more complex, it started slowing things down for him, and so the Astral Pulse is a very powerful energy source which would help Shroud become omniscient, or in other words, having unlimited knowledge and understanding absolutely everything, making him virtually unstoppable. Trying to do this video while under the weather wasn't easy, but getting immersed in the lore of everything regarding the game distracted me from all that, so at least that helped. But that's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed it and want to send me well wishes, let me know by leaving a like on the video, and if you want more content like this, be a legend and hit that sub button. I shall see you legends in the next video. Peace.